Warning. This video contains mature content. Viewers should be minimum 18 years olds. Or use internet for like 2 weeks. All characters in this game are minimum 18 years old. Welcome to the review of Eiyu Senki, Gold, A New Conquest. And in a way Eiyu Senki, the World Conquest. Eiyu Senki is a simplified turn-based strategy game. The game can be divided into 2 phases. One of them is the turn-based strategy, where we increase numbers in our regiments and replenish them after hard battles. We choose very scripted goals for conquest or diplomacy, with action limit per turn. And the second phase is turn-based combat, where we place our troops on the battlefield and give them orders during the battles. Effectiveness of units depends of class and placement. The equivalent of this game would be games from the Total War series. Of course, very simplified and scaled to the 18+ gaming market we are in. At the beginning, we only have one settlement and a few small units. But under the leadership of the protagonist with the status of the Chosen One, you will lead our troops to a victory so cool that the defeated commanders will want to join our army. And why all the kings and commanders of the old days are female figures, I leave it to your imagination. Unless you know what channel you are on. By which you understand what will happen between individual officers and our great Chosen One with an undefined past. Especially when we perform several side missions for a given historical commander or hero. All this to fulfill our goal, which is world peace. Of course, some factions do not agree with our ideals, so we have to show them a better way. And for some I mean the whole world, but that's no problem because we are fighting for world peace. Now why talking about one game, I will discuss sort of 2 games. I suspect that it will be a little complicated at the beginning, so bear with me. So these titles came out over the course of several years. While the changes regarding the gameplay and the interface have been quite cosmetic. But the story and side missions are completely different. So you will say that Eiyu Senki Gold is just the second part. And once again I have to deny it. The story is completely different and yet almost the same. Let me use an example of game from the Pokemon series, where both versions have minor differences in history. However, the main storyline is essentially preserved. And now try to push it to the max. Perhaps World of Warcraft would be a better example here, or Star Wars, The Old Republic. Although I must point out that I have never played it, so forgive any minor inaccuracies. Namely, I can choose the side of the Alliance or the Horde. So in theory, the experience of the campaign and the story will be completely different depending on which side you choose. While still on both sides of the barricade of history, we will still be playing the same game. In the World Conquest version, this character is our main ally. Where in the version of A New Conquest is this character. Although the heroine from the previous game still has a role in it. Where in World Conquest we start our conquest of the world from China and its adjacent territories. At New Conquest we set off on a mission to America to help in the Civil War. In general, the second part seems to me to be more structured to catch as much of the Western market as possible. Where in the first installment we started with the dream of Japanese historians, the conquest of China. In the second one we start chasing criminals in the Wild West, we help in the Civil War and we kill Indians in large numbers. If these are not activities that try to appeal to the American market, then I will start wearing foil hat and do some productive work. Some of you may now be wondering if the changes are big enough to justify this game as your own entity rather than a DLC. Or it is all a quick cash jump. So yes, all storylines and all side quests have been rewritten. And that the game is enough for about 50 hours of gameplay. Of course, each character has an actor voicing him. Except our main character. And there are over 60 of these characters. It was not an option to hire 3 voice actors to somehow pull the show off. Of course, not all lines are dubbed, but the main quest plus all side quests for side characters are played by the actors. And trust me, that is a lot for play, especially when you try to finish this game for a review. so I think a new Conquest stands as a standalone game. Especially that EA does much less regarding FIFA and somehow buyers have no problem with it. If the future third part of this series does the same as the second game, meaning, gives us a new story packed with new characters and stories to tell, I won't have a problem with that. But maybe we'll start with a history lesson in our pseudo-history game to understand this phenomenon. Before, the current Japanese market was dominated by a certain genre. There was a very small niche, also about travel in time and space. Namely, I am talking about relocating protagonists with interesting character traits to feudal Japan. And speaking more precisely to the era where there were great wars for the position of the new shogun. And why this historic era? Well, probably all authors and developers had it in history lessons, which also can be applied to potential Japanese customers. And it is in this era where even someone who started out wearing sandals from someone could become the most influential figure in the country. Therefore, anyone in Japan who paid attention to their history lessons for 50 seconds could plunge into this world of self-love, where he could do great deeds with little knowledge or physical skill. Of course, we are ignoring such realistic aspects as the actual effectiveness of such a teleportation or the language barrier. So it's no surprise that this theme was popular in various media, even in 18+ games. And to the fans of this cult production from many years ago, I will only say that the comparison will be later. Because such a comparison must be made, and to inform the fans of both productions. Now the visual layer, of course, is taken from an island country in Far East Asia, so you know what to expect. Especially the appreciation must go to those responsible for backgrounds. It's not what I thought I'd ever say in these types of production, but that's where I am. It is a pity that not every city got such wonderful treatment. Hold on there in Stockholm. Hope you guys survived this summer. Simple things on the battlefield also add to the climate, such as the fact that our commanders have their troops matched to the commander himself. I almost forgot to show this. Kind of a small thing, but I can guarantee that I'm enjoying this every time. Unfortunately, this realistic aspect of armed conflicts probably appeared only in the second game. As for the works you're probably most interested in, I must say that it was the hit or miss. But before you grab the pitchforks and torches, yes, Oyari Ishito is a great artist as the folktale says. But the old tale also says that the Japanese cannot draw ass, even if their lives depended on it. Where I suspect that some people will calmly present equally static pictures from individual visual novels that will dominate the examples shown by me. I will say something, so please me leave this minefield in one piece. I like his character designs, but the drawings, especially in the second part, lacked finishing. Let's say that he got paid for quantity not quality and the deadlines were tight. And let's move to next topic. Because this is where an interesting element of human psychology comes into effect. While to get to the interesting content in visual novel, we only need a poorly trained monkey that can click one button for an hour. Here, for the reward, we have to try a little more, especially in the optional boss fights. This is a strange phenomenon in which we will highly value, for example, a diploma for which we have worked hard and for a long time. Even if it was a diploma for professional garden weeding. Then if someone gave us $30 just like that, I doubt if we will take a long time to spend this money. And as soon as we got them, we'll spend them on something that just happens to attract our attention. Easy come, easy go. That's why it's hard for me to compare the given works, without getting into how a given character defeated the enemy and saved me 10 minutes of life to go through this hard fight again. I am 100% biased in this situation, and you should know it. Especially since this is a game with 18+ elements. Not the other way around, it's important. Even if you take everything that is not allowed on YouTube, it would still be a okay game. Of course, the cherry on the top would be missing, but its existence would be justified. But if someone is going to play it only for themes allowed above a certain age, he will be disappointed. It also happens that for 2 hours of gameplay you will not see anything that would stimulate your senses. Then there may be one scene and nothing for 2 hours again. Therefore, your search for erotic scenes may look like this.
Found anything yet? Nothing yet, sir! How about you? Not a thing, sir! What about you guys? We ain't found shit!
The first part of the series tried to apply an interesting method here, which showed an erotic scene right at the beginning of the game to make players realize that these elements are present in the game during long playthroughs, and that they not make a mistake purchasing wrong game. The second part just came out as if the players knew what they were getting into. Like I said, game with 18+ elements, not the other way around. Now let's move on to sound design and music. As I have already mentioned, the game has over 60 historical characters and heroes from Legends, each dubbed. And for those who are curious, yes, the voice actresses also read and play their lines in key scenes. Fans of Japanese entertainment will be very pleased, and their opponents will be very disappointed. So if you are not a fan of Japanese voice acting, this game will not change that. So in the West, no changes or all quiet on the Western Front in English. However, with music, I have to stop for a long time. Listen to this. It is one of the few productions so far where for video can I use the soundtrack as background music. At first I was wondering why they went to so much trouble with such a soundtrack. After all, what other productions do are simple looped melodic lines. And they are good because they do not disturb what is on the screen. And when I asked myself this question, the answer came by itself. In game not much happens under the banner of animation. That I will not mention the 18+ content that the player may not experience in many battles. Something else had to take a main role besides gameplay, and that was music. Many songs depend on who we fight, where we fight, or how big our empire is. At first I thought the music is too good by industry standards. And then I realized that it had to be exactly that good, or else a 50-hour game would have suffered heavily. So yes, the music influences the key element, which is non-erotic gameplay in 18+ game. If you aren't keeping up, then you better set up the seatbelts, because now we'll discuss the setting and story. Setting and story is really dumb. And I love it. Okay, so we have feudal Japan with samurai and everything. Overseas, we have the 19th century United States, where president is Columbus. Yes, Columbus. But we are not slowing down. We have a European Union led by Napoleon and Hannibal as the chief general. In the United Kingdom we have Arthurian legends where maids fight with laser cannons. And we're still not slowing down. Ivan the Grozny rules in Russia, with the help of Rasputin. In Central and South America, we have the Aztec and Inca empires, respectively. We have antique China with Sun Tzu. And of course, the Empire of Alexander the Great, which formed the union with Kublai Khan from Mongolia. And also Australia. Australia is simply today's Australia. Of course, I did not mention all the nations and characters. But enough to microwave brains of some history fans. I also suggest that every writer or screenwriter who creates a coherent whole story out of this universe should immediately receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I think that you will all agree with me on that case. As for the characters, here's an example of Commodore Perry, who gets into an argument with Billy Kid.
Yes! 噂のバカビリーです。Fuck you, Billy!
It would also seem that with so many interesting characters the dialogues practically write themselves. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. Sometimes the characters are constructed in an interesting way, although they rarely respect their historical counterparts. Other times, our historical heroes are just marginally developed from an interesting concept. And sometimes characters are played as one-trick pony throughout the game. And I am not surprised. If I had to choose so many heroes, from all over the world and from different eras, to present them in an interesting way, certainly I would have slaughtered some interesting characters, because at first glance they would not appeal to me. It's just that not everyone can be great.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
And it is difficult to expect from the Japanese developers to carefully analyze the Iliad or the Odyssey for the 18+ game. Expect more that they drew historical sources from movies like Troy or 300. Maybe these characters are not very faithful to the story, but at least they try to be as interesting and memorable as possible. Which is perhaps the most important thing in a game of this kind, even if it often comes at a price.
Look how they massacred my boy.
And maybe now let's start comparing Eiyu Senki with Sengoku Rance. Because the veterans of the Rance series may think that this game will simply extend the concept from a certain game. Both versions tell about a hero from nowhere who has to lead an army, manage the nation and collect women in bulk. Now where I present the difference in mechanics that may convince you to one game but discourage you to the other. Also, like Battlefield and Call of Duty are multiplayer-oriented shooters in the concept, there are two completely different productions in the game. First thing is the difficulty level and its distribution. In Eiyu Senki, it's really hard to lose when we're talking about the campaign as a whole. Sure, we can lose the battle, which is always in some way a riddle. However, the penalty for this is marginal, where we can just load, try a different deployment or return to the battlefield with a more powerful army 10 turns later. In short, the game gives us time and resources. Thanks to which overcoming problems is not a question like, how? But rather, when? Of course, we can still set challenges ourselves, just like me trying to conquer Russia in winter without proper clothing. But there were no major consequences behind the failure. One day I will conquer Russia in winter in Eiyu Senki games, but it was not that day. Now Rance. So why every action in Sengoku Rance is important? Because the opponents are not idle. Within 20 to 30 turns they can double or even triple their army. If you have waged war carelessly, it may turn out that you can barely replenish your losses, let alone develop the army. Meanwhile, the enemy already has an army of tens of thousands and is constantly growing. Not to mention other enemies and random problems. Where in Eiyu Senki the enemy is static and only we grow in strength. Another thing is to anticipate the unpredictable. Oh dear player, you didn't know that this country will declare war on you this turn? Oh, what a pity that you just started a war with another country. And I hope you will prepare for a crisis that will come in the next 6 turns, about which certainly I will not notify you. Where in Eiyu Senki you complete side missions with the difficulty of walking in the park when you feel like it. In Sengoku Rance, you reflect on each decision by several hours as if your gameplay depended on it. Where practically always is the case. The creators assumed that suffering and losing is very fun, so they gave you a lot of fun. So managing the nations in these two games is different like fire and water. And it's the same with battles. At first glance, they look identical, with entire units delivering blows between themselves in a more complicated rock-paper-scissors version. This is where Eiyu Senki stands out, who, thanks to the greater number of characters with his various forms, gives more space to show off. Where for each strategy there are at least 3 counter-strategies. Character shifting positions, making enemies' powerful attacks hit the void, and choosing optimal targets is the key to victory. And Rance assumes that war is won in factories, not on the battlefield. And if you neglected the development of your country, do not count on ending a war before Christmas. And if your best tactic is, if we send enough people, some of them will survive. I wish you good luck with all my heart. Especially since who you will face in battle is very random. Sometimes it will be 3 ranged units ready to slaughter. And sometimes a wall that can't be penetrated, plus a second line that is effective in providing support and massive amounts of damage. And I hope that you have prepared your army and commanders for such an eventuality, because if not... Oh, I will add only one small thing. You can permanently lose your best commanders during a fight. Good luck. I could mention examples for a long time, but this comparison is enough to make the fans of the Sengoku series aware that this game will not be the same experience as they would expect. And if they want to experience Sengoku Rance gameplay, then they have to come back to it, because Eiyu Senki won't give them that. And for people who, after finishing the both titles from the Eiyu Senki series, will be looking for another casual game where they will be able to build an army and collect girls in peace, they will experience a culture shock. And unfortunately such a comparisons are needed, not to evaluate the given production, but to make people aware of what to expect and what not. I love both games, despite how different they are, and I had a great time with both. Even if I cursed beyond measure with Sengoku Rance. And I can't pinpoint which one is better because how different genres they represent. However, both titles have in common that they put the gameplay over 18+ elements. Okay, enough for this comparison. Sengoku Rance deserves a separate review, which will be later than sooner due to an overdose of strategy games in my veins. So, maybe a few more tips. In part 1 it is marked which zone belong to which difficulty level. Second game it is a bit worse in this, especially if you played part 1 and you already have bad habits. Let's say that starting in the Americas would be a good idea. There must be some bugs in a game with so many scripts. If it does, it usually concerns 1 or 2 side quests. Sometimes it helps to turn on the autoplay of dialogues, or to speed them up. And sometimes nothing will help and you have to bite the bullet. And since we have already established that the first and second parts are only such in name. However, I recommend starting with the first one, despite the fact that the so-called second part has improved many elements. And the main factor why, is the price. The first part can be sold for around $10 or €10 on Steam during sale. Which in my opinion is a very good price for such production. And the second part you see in this video only recently appeared on Steam. Therefore, do not count on such discounts right away. As for the 18+ patch, you can get it on the developer website. Unfortunately, it is only available for an extra charge. When I just wanted to praise some Japanese publisher. So once again people who pirate will get full experience immediately. Unfortunately, those who buy this honestly, have to play in self-installing patches additionally for a fee. Sometimes it seems to me that the 18+ market on Steam is a place where the worst politics from the West and the East meet and together they try to create a fusion. Finally, a small digression. Those who fire up Eiyu Senki, the world conquest for the first time right after the intro. Perhaps they will notice quite a large number of archetypes of certain characters, especially after a few hours of entertainment. So, as a fan of the opposite of this archetype, I decided to begin a little investigation. Are these really hard facts, or is it my mind playing tricks on me and constructing a thesis that is unsupported in reality? Whether the amount of loli in this game is too high or whether my favorite archetype MILF is actually represented in trace amounts. So I counted and divided all the girls into 3 archetypes. Loli, MILF, and generic anime/manga schoolgirl build between them, which is an average of the 2 extremes. Yes, I was counting it, and yes, you're watching it. So let's call it a draw and let's agree that humanity has lost and let's move on to the results. Nah, it turns out my mind is playing tricks on me. Maybe it was due to Loli's massive appearance in the early hours of the game. But I really recommend this games. If I had to name an equivalent to AAA titles in this industry, games from this series would definitely be on the list. And that would be it, I need a break from the strategy. So the next one will be all favorite time management simulator. And sorry it took me so long, but at least you now have 150 hours divided into 3 games. And maybe more. Big Mike. Next time.